Hello everyone, tonight we're going somewhere you probably weren't invited to, but should have been. Picture this, a grand wedding venue tucked deep in the Oregon hills, soft candlelight flickering against marble floors, floral arches so tall they nearly brush the ceiling, and guests dressed to the nines, each with champagne in one hand and judgment in the other. Now imagine being the mother of the groom and being told you're not welcome. You might not survive the social fallout of being erased at your own son's wedding, but I did, and it changed everything. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this somewhere cozy, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love knowing where you're tuning in from. Now turn off the lights, maybe get a fan going for some soft noise, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. I never thought my own child would humiliate me, especially not on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. But there I was, standing at the entrance of the Belle Haven estate outside Salem, Oregon. The air was thick with gardenia and money. Candlelight flickered across crystal glasses and polished oak. I could see my reflection in the doors, lipstick, perfect hair curled, clutch in hand, and yet I never got past the threshold. Samantha, my soon-to-be daughter-in-law, stood like a sentry in her ivory lace gown, her eyes sharp behind a soft smile. "I'm sorry," she said sweetly but loudly. "You weren't invited. Please leave." It was meant to sound gentle, but it wasn't. It was a scalpel wrapped in satin. My name is Eleanor Reed, and that was the moment I realized I didn't have a seat at the table I helped build. I didn't argue, didn't beg. Just stood there as guests turned their heads one by one like dominoes. Some looked away politely, others smirked. A few even whispered, "Isn't that Logan's mom?" Logan, my son, stood a few feet behind her. He never said a word, not even a glance. The silence between us sliced cleaner than any scream. I felt the weight of $1,000 in every flower arrangement behind her, every glass of imported champagne, every square foot of the marble floor I helped pay for. But none of it bought me entry. "I see," I said, voice calm, steady. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because I refused to let her see me bleed. I turned each step slow and deliberate, as if walking away on my own terms would make up for the door slamming in my face. Behind me, the whispers crackled like old paper. "She's leaving. Did someone film that? Who does that to their own mother?" Outside, the night air cut through me with more honesty than anything inside ever had. I made it to my old hatchback parked among a sea of luxury sedans, another quiet reminder that I was the wrong kind of guest. I rested my palms on its chipped hood, breathing slow, waiting for the sting behind my eyes to fade. One tear slipped out, just one. Then I whispered, "What is love without respect?" It wasn't a question anymore. It was armor. By the time I pulled onto the road, headlights slicing through hedges and silence, I knew. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration. I was no longer part of their version of the story, but I hadn't signed off on my role yet. Back home, my modest house welcomed me with lavender-scented stillness. I slipped off my shoes more from habit than grace and lowered into my favorite armchair, the one with worn fabric and reliable arms. This wasn't grief. It was clarity. The wedding they threw without me, I paid for it. Not entirely, but enough. College tuition, down payment on their starter home, partial deposits for every single wedding vendor, and I had the contracts to prove it. That's the thing about being generous. You start thinking it'll buy you a place in people's lives. Samantha always kept things civil, but cold. The kind of cold that wears pearls and fake smiles. I used to tell myself she'd warm up to me. Spoiler, she didn't. And Logan, well, he was always trying to keep the peace. That became his favorite excuse to say nothing while everything crumbled. I had let it happen. Quietly, graciously, foolishly. I thought if I stayed helpful, they'd eventually see my worth. Turns out they only loved what I could offer. And once the checks stopped coming, so did the kindness. The next morning, I barely touched my coffee. I just sat there staring at the little oak table by the door, the same one Logan used to bang his toy trucks on when he was 3. Funny how memory clings to furniture. Around 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. Nadine. She always knew when to show up after big family events. She carried a bakery box and a cautious smile. "I brought lemon," she said, holding it out like a peace treaty. "Your favorite." I stepped aside and waved her toward the kitchen. The kettle was already warm. She didn't ask. Not right away. Nadine had a gift for timing. She waited while I poured the tea, my hands steady, despite the storm still rumbling behind my ribs. "It was public, wasn't it?" she asked gently, eyes low. I nodded. "They didn't disinvite me." "Because they never invited me in the first place." The words felt heavier out loud than they ever had in my head. Nadine reached across the table and rested her warm hand on mine. "You raised him better than that," she whispered. I didn't answer, because maybe I hadn't. What kind of son lets his mother be humiliated like that? And says nothing. A small flickering candle sat in my kitchen window. Its wax pooled quietly at the base, steady and unfazed by our hurt. I thought if I gave enough, if I helped enough, I'd be safe. Nadine's voice was gentle but firm. "Honey, love that depends on your wallet isn't love." I swallowed hard. They love my money more than me. The truth landed like glass on tile. Painful. Irretrievable. "Being alone is better than being used," she said. That hit me harder than the wedding did. But I wasn't alone, not really, not anymore. I had Nadine, I had my quiet house, and now I had something else. A plan. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It unfurled slowly, like steam curling off hot tea. At first I only wanted answers. But what I found in the quiet of my own kitchen, staring at a half-sliced lemon cake and a woman who'd never let me fall, was something far more potent. Resolve. Nadine stayed with me most of that morning, though we didn't talk much. Some friendships don't need words. She washed the teacups even though I told her not to. She straightened a crooked dish towel on the oven door. She hummed while wiping down the counter some old tune we both forgot the name of. It wasn't until she left pressing my shoulder on her way out that I picked up my phone and saw Logan's name blinking across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I still don't know why I picked up. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was hope. "Hi, Mom," he said, too cheery. The voice of someone trying to erase something awful with a smile. "How are you?" I kept my tone even. "I'm well, Logan. Enjoying the peace, actually." He chuckled awkwardly. "Yeah, well, I just wanted to, call and apologize for what happened yesterday." There it was, the obligatory apology. No details, no ownership, just enough to technically check the box. I stayed silent, giving him rope. "We didn't mean for it to come out like that," he added, as if he'd forgotten I'd been dismissed like a waiter at their 5-course reception. "Samantha was just stressed, you know how weddings are." I exhaled softly. These things happen. Another pause. "Actually, while I've got you," he said, his voice shifting into something more businesslike, "we were hoping you could finalize the last installment on the wedding fund. Just to settle everything now that the big day's behind us." And there it was, the real reason for the call. He didn't think I knew, but I did. I'd been careful from the start. Samantha had never seen the contracts. She thought everything was paid, but I had only paid the deposits. The bulk of the money, the real money, was still tethered to me, to my approval. Every caterer, every band, every flower truck still waiting to be paid had one thing in common. They couldn't move forward without my final sign-off. I had made sure of it. Quietly, carefully. Months ago, when Logan first asked me to help with the wedding, I agreed on one condition: that all final payments required my authorization. It wasn't about control, not back then. It was just protection. My estate advisor, Tracy, had recommended it, just in case she said. At the time, I thought it was unnecessary. Now I saw it was the smartest thing I ever did. So I answered Logan softly, "Of course, sweetheart. I'll take a look at everything tomorrow." He let out a breath so loud it fuzzed the phone speaker. "Oh, great, that's great. Samantha's parents are just anxious to wrap things up. You know how her dad is." I smiled faintly. I understand completely. Wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone. After he hung up, far too thankful, too eager, I sat still, letting the silence answer the real question. They thought they'd gotten everything they needed, except they hadn't. Not yet. The wedding binder still sat on the bookshelf in my study untouched since Samantha's first Pinterest frenzy. I pulled it down and opened the front flap like it was a war map. And in a way it was. Neatly tabbed and highlighted were every agreement, every invoice, every fine print clause that tied each luxurious detail of their big day to one thing: my name. The venue still owed $18,000, the florist $40,000, and those imported orchids still sitting at customs. The band, the string quartet. Samantha had cried over unpaid. I flipped through the pages slowly, my fingertips grazing the bold print, final payment due upon client's signature. My signature. I didn't smile, not really, but something settled in me. Not revenge, just reality. They had tried to erase me while still cashing in on everything I gave them. Now it was my turn. That evening, I sat at my desk with a fresh spreadsheet open. Column after column, I filled it in vendor. Amount due, due date, freeze code, contact person. By 9 p.m., I called Tracy's emergency line. She answered on the second ring. "Eleanor," she said, voice still crisp despite the hour. "Talk to me." "Trouble." "No," I replied calmly, proof of concept. I explained everything in clean, neutral sentences. No anger, no drama, just facts. She let out a low whistle when I was done. "You want to proceed tonight." "I want the mechanism ready," I said. "If they try anything Monday, I want them frozen mid-step." She promised draft notices by sunrise. After we hung up, I printed a second set of every document, slipped them into plastic sleeves, labeled the binder with a new name, Evidence. Not for revenge, for protection. Because here's something no one tells you until it's too late. Trust is a gift, and once stolen, it doesn't grow back. The storm outside cracked with distant thunder. Inside, my only lightning came from the cursor, blinking on my screen. Steady. Waiting. I stared out the window into the Oregon dark. Somewhere out there, Logan and Samantha were probably sipping champagne, believing everything had gone off without a hitch. And I let them believe it, because nothing delivers clarity quite like silence. A quirky fact, the average U.S. wedding costs about $30,000. Samantha's cost triple that, which is a bold move when your marriage hasn't even made it to dessert. And as I sat in my small lavender-scented home alone, yes, but not broken, I remembered something my grandmother used to say: "You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate." And I had tolerated enough. Saturday afternoon brought a rare kind of stillness. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful, just expectant, like a breath held too long. I could feel something shifting, not in the wind, not in the weather, but in me. I left the binder on the desk and headed to the local community center where I usually joined the senior lunch group once a week. It wasn't fancy folding chairs, styrofoam cups, lukewarm tea, but it was honest. The kind of space where people looked you in the eye instead of around the room for someone more important. Margaret and Joanne were already at our usual table. They both waved me over smiles worn from long lives and longer stories. Joanne, always the first to notice, gave me that soft sideways glance. "You look tired," she said, placing a biscuit on my plate. "Family drama." I gave a small nod, folding my hands in my lap. "Something like that." Margaret, sharper and less delicate, didn't miss a beat. "Does it involve money?" That surprised me. She hit the nerve without even knowing it. But maybe she did know. Most women our age learn to recognize the signs. "They usually do when the kids are involved," she added gently. "Trust me." The room buzzed around us, bingo numbers, someone laughing near the coffee table, but at our corner, everything slowed. Became quieter, more serious. "They think I'm weak because I stay quiet," I confessed. Margaret leaned closer. "Quiet doesn't mean weak, it means smart. You learn to hold your cards close." Joanne nodded. "You hold everything they think they control. That's why they smile at you while they sharpen their knives." I blinked, feeling that odd mixture of grief and clarity. They were right. I had let myself believe silence was grace, that by not fighting, I was rising above. But really, I was just letting them win. "What would you do?" I asked softly. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Protect what's yours, quietly. Make sure they never see it coming." And that's when it truly sank in. They didn't love me. Not really. They loved what I could give. That night after I got home, I poured a glass of wine not out of habit but ceremony. It felt like a turning point deserved a ritual. The house was quiet again, not cold, just calm. I sat down at my little desk by the window, pulled out the binder labeled Evidence, and started reviewing each contract like I was reading the story of my own erasure. There, in those invoices and signatures, was proof of how much I had been willing to give, and how little they thought I'd ever push back. By Friday morning, I was ready. Not emotionally, no one's ever emotionally ready to see their own child as a stranger, but legally, I was ironclad. Tracy and I met again over a secure video call. She had the same sleek bun and matte lipstick she always wore, but this time her eyes held a new kind of fire. Authorization withdrawal phrase is in place, she said. Any attempt to process the pending balances will trigger automatic fraud alerts and hard holds. My name on paper was now legally untouchable. Your verification card is now effectively dead to the system, she added. The phrase will signal all vendors suspected fraud. 3 words. That's all it took. Authorization withdrawn. Suspected fraud. It felt surreal. You understand, Tracy continued gently, they may try to challenge this, perhaps even legally. Once the panic sets in. I nodded. Good, let them. I wasn't afraid of being discovered. I wasn't hiding. I was ready. Tracy leaned back in her chair, assessing me. You've left no gaps. Overprepared feels like safety, I said. It reminded me of a little phrase my dad used to say when I was young, build the roof before the rain comes. He'd say it every time I wanted to procrastinate. That man fixed things before they broke. And now I was doing the same. Only this time, the thing that needed fixing wasn't a roof, it was me. That afternoon, I drove to my bank. No appointments, no assistants, just me. Mr. Riley, the branch manager, met me with a kind smile. Mrs. Reed, everything's been updated as requested. Dual verification on all savings, investment, and inheritance accounts. Any external request will trigger a full stop unless personally approved by you in person in this office. I nodded, my voice calm. Thank you. He hesitated, then lowered his voice slightly. Fraud from within families is rising, especially when assets start to shift. Your preparation puts you ahead of most. A part of me winced at that. The implication. But the rest of me, the part that had been shoved out of her son's wedding, that part nodded in agreement. Saturday morning came with a soft sun and a gentle breeze through the sheer curtains of my kitchen. It should have felt like spring. Instead, it felt like a countdown. The orchids still sat in JFK Customs. The florist had emailed a gentle reminder. The venue had sent their second invoice request. Everything was in motion, and they didn't even know the clock had started ticking. Then just before noon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I glanced through the peephole. Logan. He stood there, holding a glossy bouquet, hydrangeas and lilies, the kind you give when you want to look contrite, but still classy. I waited a beat before opening the door. Surprise visit, he said, smiling like we hadn't just gone nuclear 6 days ago. I stepped aside and let him in. The apartment smelled like fresh coffee and lavender oil. I watched him take it in, eyes scanning the room, calculating whether I was still angry. I wasn't. Anger was too heavy. What I had now was consequence. You look wonderful, he said, relaxed. I am, I replied, motioning toward the couch. He sat carefully, placing the flowers on the table like a peace offering. Then came the small talk, weather, the honeymoon, how incredible everything still was. I let him speak. I smiled. I nodded. Then, as expected, he shifted. Mom, I've been thinking, he said, lowering his voice into that careful, slightly paternal tone. With everything going on, you've got a lot to manage. Accounts, paperwork. Samantha and I were wondering, maybe it's time to simplify, consolidate things. Easier oversight, less risk. Ah, there it was. I picked up my tea and took a slow sip. That's very thoughtful, I said, setting the cup down with a soft clink, but I'm quite comfortable with my arrangements. His smile tightened. Of course. But you know things can get confusing as people get older. He meant weaker. I stayed neutral. Confusion comes from lack of planning, I said evenly. And fortunately, I've been planning carefully for some time. He blinked. Just once. That was all I needed to see. He wasn't used to this version of me, the one who didn't flinch. "You know you can trust me," he said, leaning in. "We're family." I smiled fully for the first time. Trust, Logan, is not inherited. It's earned. He didn't speak after that. He just looked at me, truly looked, and realized for the first time he was no longer in control. When Logan finally left that day, he gave me one last lingering look at the door like he expected me to soften, to take the flowers and the half apology and let it all wash over like nothing happened. I didn't. I simply smiled, kind but distant. "Have a safe drive, honey." Then I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, not because I was tired, but because I needed a moment to feel the quiet. It wasn't anger filling the room, it was peace. Not the gentle, fuzzy kind that wraps around you like a throw blanket. No, this was the steel-lined peace that follows a decision, the kind that says, "You've seen enough. Now you act accordingly." The next few days, Logan's messages came like a soft drizzle, annoying, persistent, and impossible to ignore. Articles about financial planning for seniors, friendly reminders about consolidating accounts, even a link to a video called Estate Simplification for Aging Parents. Each one carried that same sugary tone sweet on the outside but laced with control. I answered everyone. Politely. "That's a helpful article, Logan. I'll ask my advisor what she thinks. Thanks for the reminder. I've been meaning to take another look at my accounts. Good video, interesting points." I wasn't buying what he was selling, but I wasn't slamming the door either. I was just buying time. Behind the scenes, I was meeting with Diane again, my lawyer. Sharp, efficient, the kind of woman who says little and means everything. She flipped through the folder I'd started building. Every email, every text, every thinly veiled attempt to inch closer to my finances. Printed, dated, and cataloged. "Good," she said, scanning the pages. "Keep them coming. Every one of these helps, especially if they ever try to push for guardianship." The word landed like cold water. Guardianship. I looked up. "You think they'd try?" Diane didn't flinch. "They already are. Just not legally. Yet." It took me a moment to swallow that truth. But she was right. I'd spent decades being generous, being mom, writing checks, offering keys, and somewhere along the way, they started treating my kindness like a down payment on ownership. Now they were trying to move in on my life, my choices, my future. "They don't even realize they're building my defense," I said, tapping the stack of printed emails. Diane smiled just slightly. "Exactly." And that's when I knew I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was already in one. I was just finally showing up. Monday morning, sunlight crept across the living room floor in long golden stripes. The binder sat beside me like a sleeping animal, calm but capable. I made my tea. Earl Grey, 2 sugars, sat in my armchair and waited. No texts yet. Not from Logan, but I knew it wouldn't take long. By noon, the first call came not from Logan, but from Tracy. "Eleanor," she said, voice composed, "the venue's accounting department has reached out. They've submitted a formal inquiry about releasing funds." And I asked, "We triggered the fraud lock as planned. They've been informed payment is frozen pending investigation of irregularities." "Good," I said. "Document everything." "I already have." Tracy's voice was calm, but underneath it, I could hear something else, admiration. Not for the chaos, but for the order I'd built beneath it. "You've left them no loose threads to pull," she added. A little warmth bloomed in my chest. Not pride, not yet, but something like validation. I wasn't being cold, I was being clear. By 3 p.m., my phone lit up again. This time the call was from the florist. "Mrs. Reed," she asked, her voice tight. "We're having trouble processing the final customs payment for the floral imports. The orchids are sitting at JFK. If we can't release them soon, they'll be seized or destroyed." She paused. "We were told you were overseeing the account. Is there any update?" Her tone was polite but anxious. I could hear the panic pressing against the professionalism. "I appreciate your diligence," I replied warmly. "At this time, all disbursements are on hold. I'll notify the appropriate parties when internal concerns are resolved." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Reed, I understand, but these flowers are perishable. The holding fees are climbing." "I understand," I repeated gently. Unfortunately, this is out of my control for now." She thanked me, still hopeful, still believing a check might fall from the sky. It wouldn't. By 5 p.m., Logan's name finally appeared on my screen. I answered. "Mom," he said breathlessly, "why didn't you tell me there was a problem the florist just called? They're saying payments are frozen. What's going on?" I stayed calm. Calm feels like a superpower when you're talking to someone who only understands volume. "What's going on," I said softly, "is exactly what you orchestrated." "What?" "You made arrangements assuming I'd quietly fund everything without question. You chose to cut me out. I'm simply honoring that decision." "That's not fair," he snapped. Ashley was just stressed. "No, Logan, you were both deliberate. You didn't forget to include me. You excluded me. And now the weight of that choice is settling where it belongs." He paused, his voice dropped an octave. "You're embarrassing us," he hissed. "Ashley's parents are furious. Vendors are calling. This is getting out of hand." "No," I said, my voice like a lock sliding into place. "You let it get out of hand when you mistook generosity for obligation, love for submission. You assumed love meant I'd keep giving forever no matter how you treated me." He went quiet. "You're ruining everything," he said, voice cracking. "No, Logan," I said with more sadness than anger. "I'm just removing what was never appreciated." He didn't respond. For a moment, the silence stretched between us, thick, tangled, like all the years we'd once shared now pulling apart thread by thread. The truth is, when you love someone deeply, you don't expect them to be perfect. But you do expect them to show up, and Logan didn't, not when it mattered. They didn't just plan a wedding without me. They tried to build a future on my silence. And now the scaffolding was falling. I'd always believed that Logan had a good heart. That belief was starting to feel like one of those cheap souvenirs you pick up on a road trip, sentimental fragile, and ultimately made for someone who no longer existed. That night, after the final call ended and the house fell back into quiet, I didn't pace or cry or call anyone. I just sat in my favorite chair, the one by the window, wrapped in a quilt Nadine had given me years ago. The night air drifted in through a cracked window, carrying that earthy Oregon scent of pine and moss and rain, not quite fallen, and I let it hold me. You know, someone once told me that when you're deeply betrayed by someone you love, your brain doesn't process it all at once. It unfurls in layers, like peeling wallpaper you didn't know was loose. That was happening to me now. It wasn't just the wedding, it was the years before it. Little dismissals, being left out of group texts, hearing about milestones secondhand, Samantha's tight-lipped smiles, Logan's subtle rewrites of our history. Like how he paid his way through college when I'd spent sleepless nights picking up weekend shifts to make tuition work. Like how the house was theirs when I was the one who co-signed the loan. One memory in particular crept in, his college graduation. I'd bought him a custom-tailored suit. He didn't wear it. Samantha said it didn't match the aesthetic of their group photos. That was the first time I noticed it, the way she spoke for both of them, the way he let her, and the way I stayed quiet. That was always my mistake. I confused grace with permission. Tuesday morning, I met Diane at her office again. There was something satisfying about watching her flip through our documents like a general reviewing battle plans. "All pending payments are officially locked," she said, clicking through tabs. "We've filed the authorization withdrawal across all your wedding-linked accounts. Any attempt to process the final balances will now trigger automatic fraud alerts." "Good," I said simply. She glanced up. "They may try to challenge it, maybe even legally, especially if panic sets in." I nodded. Let them. And I meant it, because I wasn't frightened anymore. I wasn't hoping for reconciliation or longing for an apology that would never come. I was clear-eyed now, focused, calm. Patricia Diane said, her voice softer, "You understand what you're doing isn't cruel. It's necessary." I didn't answer right away, just looked out her office window at the sun cutting through gray clouds. I thought about how many women I'd met who were like me, kind, giving, smart enough to build legacies, but told to play small, quiet, grateful. Sometimes I said, finally, protection looks a lot like solitude. She smiled, but it isn't the same thing. After the meeting, I stopped at my bank. Mr. Riley, the branch manager, greeted me with that banker's warmth that always feels like a handshake wrapped in a policy manual. We've added dual verification on all of your accounts, he explained, tapping his tablet. Any outgoing transactions now require your in-person signature in this office. No proxies, no digital requests. Perfect, I replied. My voice stayed level. But inside, I felt something new. Relief, a kind of safety I didn't know I'd been missing. Fraud from within families is rising, Mr. Riley added gently. Especially after inheritances shift, you're ahead of the curve. A quirky fact, over 60% of financial abuse against the elderly comes from family members. That stat used to make me sad. Now it made me strategic. Saturday morning arrived with indecently perfect sunshine. It streamed through the windows as if it didn't know everything was unraveling behind closed doors. The orchids on my balcony swayed gently in the breeze, untouched by unpaid invoices or wedding drama. Then the doorbell rang. I knew it was him before I even looked. Logan! He stood there with a glossy bouquet, hydrangeas and lilies. Expensive, showy. The kind of flowers meant to say, let's move past this without actually fixing anything. Hey, Mom, he said, forcing a smile. Surprise visit. I stepped aside silently. Let him in. The apartment smelled like fresh coffee and lavender oil. It always did. I watched him take it in like he was trying to gauge my temperature by the air alone. You look good, he offered, relaxed. I am, I replied, calm as fog on a lake. He sat placing the bouquet on the coffee table like a peace treaty wrapped in tissue paper. Then came the small talk, weather, honeymoon, how amazing everything still was. I nodded, smiled, let him talk. And just like I knew he would, Logan shifted. His voice dropped and he leaned in. Mom, we've been thinking. Oh, here we go. With everything going on, you've got so many accounts, right? So many things to manage. It might be time to simplify, consolidate some of the finances, make things easier, safer. I sipped my tea silent. He continued, we just want to help you stay organized, maybe centralize things so you don't have to worry. That's very thoughtful, I interrupted gently. I set my cup down, but I'm quite comfortable with my arrangements. His smile tightened. Of course. But sometimes things get confusing as people get older. That word, older. I let it hang in the air like smoke. Confusion comes from lack of planning, Logan, I said softly. Fortunately, I've been planning carefully for some time. He blinked. I watched it land, that I wasn't flustered, that I wasn't scrambling, that I saw through it. You know you can trust me, he added quickly. We're family. Now I smiled, fully, peacefully. Trust, Logan, is not inherited, it's earned. And there it was. His jaw tightened, his eyes searched mine for softness, for an opening. There wasn't one. After a few more pleasantries, he stood to leave. Just think about it, okay? He said, gesturing toward the flowers, like they were some kind of charm against consequence. I will, I said. Have a safe drive. When the door clicked shut behind him, I didn't cry, didn't gloat. I just felt certain. Because here's what I know now. A child who believes love is a blank check will always be surprised when the account closes. The days that followed were a strange mix of calm and calculation. Logan's messages came regularly now. Not frantic yet, but loaded with that syrupy concern that always had a motive folded inside. One was an article titled, Protecting Your Parents from Financial Scams. Another, a YouTube link, How to Simplify Estate Planning in Your Golden Years. My favorite, though, was the text that read, Mom just want you to be safe and not overwhelmed. We care about your well-being, that's all. It was almost impressive in a disappointing way. He still thought charm could smooth over everything like buttering burnt toast. I replied to each one with grace and practiced vagueness. Thanks for looking out, Logan. We'll run it by my advisor. Appreciate the info, staying on top of things, don't worry. Interesting stuff. Hope you and Sam are settling back in. Each reply was a chess move, calm, calculated, controlled. Because while Logan was busy trying to plant seeds of influence, I was building a fortress. Behind the scenes, Diane and I were meeting again this time with intent. She arrived at my apartment early Thursday morning, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, and her no-nonsense demeanor under the other. I had already laid out the tea lemon scones and the binder we'd been assembling for weeks. Here's what we're finalizing today, she said, flipping open her notes. We initiate the full transfer. The charitable foundation is active. Your living trust is protected, and the estate is now legally wrapped in a structure they cannot penetrate. She looked up, not without burning through a legal minefield. I nodded, heart steady. Good. Diane continued, your assets, liquid and real, are under the foundation's umbrella. You retain full control, but any attempt by outside parties to modify access or redirect those funds without unanimous board approval will be blocked permanently. She tapped another file, and here your trust. Irrevocable. Your successor trustees are neutral. No family ties, no conflict of interest, no easy manipulation. There it was, the armor I needed. For years, I had handed over my time, my energy, my finances, thinking it was just what family did. But now I wasn't handing over anything I couldn't get back. I've drafted responses, Diane added, in case they try to frame this as elder abuse or incompetence. The documentation of their coercion is strong. A quiet moment passed. The sun shifted on the hardwood floor. Thank you, I said, meaning it more deeply than she could know. Because this wasn't just paperwork. This was dignity. This was control. This was finally being able to say no without guilt. After Diane left, I sat for a long while in the silence, hands around a cooling mug of tea. I thought of all the times I'd silenced my instincts to keep the peace. When Samantha corrected me in front of dinner guests. When Logan didn't visit on Mother's Day but posted a brunch with her family. When I was too busy to be included in vacation plans trips I had helped pay for. That little voice inside me had always whispered, this isn't right. I had just trained myself not to listen, until now. The next day, I visited the bank again to ensure every final safeguard was in place. Mr. Riley greeted me like an old friend. His tone was warm, but I noticed how he leaned in when he spoke like we were conspirators in some invisible rebellion. We've activated full account isolation, he said. Even if someone tries to impersonate you or present power of attorney paperwork, it'll be bounced for legal review. Perfect, I said. Truthfully, he added with a sympathetic look, you'd be surprised how often families attempt this. Children, especially. It usually starts with good intentions. But then, well, money brings out the mirror. Sometimes people don't like what they see. A debate phrase came to mind. People will always justify control if they label it as care. And isn't that the truth? By Saturday, everything was sealed. And wouldn't you know it, Logan showed up again. Unannounced, again. Same knock. Same casual grin. This time, though, no flowers. Just a folder tucked under one arm and an air of confident concern that grated like a sandpaper hug. Hey, Mom, he said as I opened the door. Mind if we talk? I didn't say yes. Just stepped back and let him in. The apartment felt even calmer than usual. The late afternoon light caught the edge of the old framed photo of him as a toddler on my hallway wall. Funny how much you can love a memory and still let go of the person it belonged to. We sat across from each other, me in my armchair, him on the edge of the couch. Listen, he started, I've been thinking. I want to make sure you're protected. You've got all these accounts, all this paperwork, and it's just you managing everything. I can help. You shouldn't have to handle it alone. He opened the folder. I've started drafting a simple revocable trust, just a placeholder. I can help oversee disbursements, manage your accounts more efficiently. There it was, the ask, dressed as a favor. I sipped my tea and smiled, calm as still water. That's thoughtful, Logan, but unnecessary. Everything's well managed. His face tightened just a bit. I just don't want you to be taken advantage of, he said. You've always trusted me. That's the thing, I interrupted gently. Trust isn't a permanent feature, it's earned and can be lost. The folder sat unopened between us like a hand he never got to play. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said finally, irritation showing. No, I said, rising slowly. I'm just not pretending anymore. He stood folder still in hand, his smile gone. You've changed, he said. Yes, I replied. I finally realized that being generous doesn't mean being blind. He left without another word, and I stood there in the fading light, not triumphant, but whole. The truth is, we train people how to treat us. And for years, I taught Logan that silence meant consent, that giving meant love, that forgiveness meant forgetfulness. But not anymore. Now I was rewriting the rules. And the first rule was this: respect isn't optional. By Monday morning, the ripples had turned into waves. Vendors were starting to notice. The florist was first, a pleasant woman with a warm Texas accent and a rising edge of panic in her tone. She called my personal line directly skipping Logan skipping Samantha, Mrs. Whitaker. I apologize for reaching out this way, she began, but we've encountered a problem. The final customs payment for the orchids hasn't gone through. The shipment's been sitting at JFK and we're at risk of losing the entire order if clearance isn't processed soon. Her voice was careful, measured panic, like someone trying to contain a spill with a napkin. The orchids, of course. Imported from Singapore because Samantha had seen a photo on Pinterest and declared that nothing else would do. I remembered the way she'd wrinkled her nose when I'd asked if local blooms could be just as beautiful. Exclusivity, she'd said. It's about setting the tone. Now that tone was wilting in cold storage, waiting for a payment I never authorized. I listened quietly as the florist continued. Customs won't hold them much longer. We were told you were the primary account contact. Is there any update you can provide? I took a slow sip of tea before answering. Thank you for calling, I said calmly. Yes, I'm aware of the situation. Right now, all payments are on hold. There are internal concerns we're sorting through. A pause on her end. Mrs. Whitaker, if we can't clear customs in the next 48 hours, the entire shipment could be seized or destroyed. I let the silence stretch. I understand, I said softly. Unfortunately, that's out of my control for now. She thanked me, still hopeful, but I could hear the tremble under her words. She wasn't used to this kind of limbo. Neither was Samantha. By 3 o'clock, the venue's accounting department had called my estate planner, Marissa. She rang me immediately after. Patricia, she said, crisp and professional, we've been contacted by the venue. They've submitted formal inquiries about releasing the final balance. I've already triggered the fraud lock, and they've been notified that funds are frozen pending investigation of irregularities. I didn't even need to ask. She anticipated the next question. They've also forwarded notice to Logan and Samantha's parents. That part made me pause, and Marissa hesitated. They've also forwarded it to Logan's employer. Apparently his new position was secured through a contact at Samantha's father's firm. The venue is pulling all available levers to ensure pressure is applied. Of course, that's how it worked with families like Samantha's. Appearances were currency. Favor networks built their stability. And now that currency was in freefall. This wasn't just about flowers or bands anymore. This was reputation. This was status. And I hadn't even raised my voice. A quirky side note, orchids are one of the most fragile flowers in the world. They symbolize luxury and refinement, but they bruise easily. They can look flawless and still be dying inside. Fitting, right? That night, I sat by my window, candle flickering against the glass, and waited. The phone rang again. Logan. His name flashed across the screen like a pulse. I answered. Mom, he said, no pleasantries. Why didn't you tell me there was some kind of problem? His voice was tight, edges fraying, the calm unraveling. The florist called Samantha's dad. In a panic, he continued. She's saying payments are frozen. Customs is threatening seizure. What's going on? I didn't rush. What's going on, Logan, I said, is that you tried to stage manage an entire wedding on my dime while erasing me from the guest list. That's not true, he snapped too quick. It was a misunderstanding. We were trying to keep the head count low. Ashley was stressed. That's not what this is about, I said calmly. You didn't forget to include me. You chose not to. And choices have consequences. His breath caught. You're embarrassing us. Samantha's parents are furious. People are calling them, calling me. This is getting out of hand. No, I corrected you, let it get out of hand. You assumed love equals silence. That support equals submission. That money comes without boundaries. Mom, he began, but I didn't let him finish. You stood at your wedding and watched me be turned away, and you said nothing. You let Samantha humiliate me in front of 100 people. That wasn't stress. That was intent. He went quiet. And then, you're ruining everything. I exhaled. No, Logan, I'm not ruining anything. I'm simply withdrawing what was never appreciated. That's not ruin, that's correction. There was nothing left for him to say. The silence stretched heavy, empty final. It's funny the way silence works. It can be terrifying or liberating, depends on who owns it. That night, I stayed up past midnight. Not to worry, not to fret, to reread every contract, every message, every tiny clause that said control stays here. Because for so long, I'd mistaken giving for goodness. But now I understood that boundaries were love in armor. Somewhere in the dark, I whispered it aloud just to test how it felt. You don't get to shame someone into silence when they finally stop handing over their worth. And just like that, I felt lighter. Not because the storm had passed, but because for the first time I wasn't standing in it alone. I'd built a shelter, brick by brick, clause by clause, and I wasn't afraid of lightning anymore. The next few days passed with a strange quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that follows a siren too still, too tense, like the moment before glass shatters. No new calls from Logan, no more sugary texts, just absence. I wasn't surprised. See, when people are used to you filling every silence, your calm becomes threatening. My stillness wasn't passive, it was strategic. And somewhere I imagined Logan and Samantha frantically refreshing their inboxes, hoping a last-minute payment would magically materialize. But it wouldn't, not this time. By Wednesday, I received a call from Diane, my lawyer. Her tone was clipped but composed. The band and the photographer have joined the breach suit, she said. They've submitted formal claims against Logan Samantha and her parents. We're not named, of course. You're fully protected. Good, I said, stirring honey into my tea. Let the facts speak. And they were, loudly. Each vendor Logan had assured would be covered, each invoice he'd assumed would vanish, with a few swipes of a card was now echoing back in the form of legal summons and formal notices. The wedding Samantha had so carefully curated was unraveling like a lace hem snagged on a nail. And I didn't need to say a word. That afternoon I went to the grocery store. Just a simple errand, but it felt different, lighter. I passed the community bulletin board where someone had pinned a flyer for ballroom dance classes. I smiled. I hadn't danced in years, not since Jack passed. But the thought of slipping into a rhythm that didn't revolve around everyone else's needs, that sounded heavenly. I grabbed an application on my way out. Back home, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Logan. It was Nancy Samantha's mother. Patricia? She said in that tight voice rich women reserve for when they're being polite but deeply inconvenienced. I think we should talk. I didn't answer right away. Let her sit in that silence. She cleared her throat. We're getting concerned about how things are escalating. The venue, the florists, the photographer, they've all come to us. It's creating unnecessary tension. Unnecessary tension. I almost laughed. I see, I said calmly. So you're finally experiencing a fraction of what I felt standing outside my own son's wedding. There was a long pause. We were under the impression, she began slowly, that everything had been arranged, that your portion was a gift. That's how Logan explained it. My portion, I echoed. Yes. The financial contribution, she clarified. And with you not attending, we assumed. You assumed wrong, I interrupted. And the assumption cost you. A soft rustling on her end, maybe papers being shuffled. Or pride. Is there any way, she asked, we can resolve this quietly without further public complications? There it was. The word she really meant wasn't resolve. It was contain. They weren't looking to make things right. They were looking to patch the leak before it flooded their country club reputation. I'm afraid, I said gently, that's out of my hands now. You'd need to speak with the vendors directly. I no longer have a financial role in your daughter's wedding. Another long pause. Then clipped, I see. She didn't thank me, just ended the call with a forced good day. The moment the line went dead, I smiled. Not out of malice, but because I knew finally that they understood. I wasn't their safety net anymore. And honestly, it felt like freedom. That evening, Gloria dropped by with a casserole dish in hand and that lopsided grin she wore when she knew gossip was involved. Well, she said, setting it down with a dramatic sigh. Word around the library is you've become something of a legend. I raised an eyebrow. Legend. She nodded, dropping into the armchair across from me. Oh yes, the woman who shut down a wedding without ever raising her voice. There's even a rumor you had the orchids rerouted to a hospice ward. I laughed. Now that's a little too poetic even for me. Well, legend needs flair, she winked. I poured us both some tea and we sat in the soft quiet, the kind only old friends can share. I have to admit, I said there are moments I wonder if I was too harsh. Gloria looked at me carefully. Were you? I don't know, I answered. There's this voice that still says, maybe I should have tried harder, explain myself more. She leaned in. Let me ask you something. If this had happened to someone else, someone you love, what would you have told them to do? I didn't hesitate. To protect themselves. Exactly, she said. It's funny how we never grant ourselves the grace we give others. I nodded slowly, letting that sink in. She was right, again. As the evening wore on, we talked about everything but the wedding, old memories, garden plans, the upcoming town festival. It reminded me that life existed outside the chaos. That joy could still sprout from scorched ground. When Gloria left, I stood by the window for a long while, watching as the streetlights blinked on one by one. And then I whispered something I hadn't said in years, not since Jack passed. I'm proud of myself. Not for the revenge, not for the strategy, but for finally putting myself on the list of people I protect. It's an odd kind of wisdom that only comes with age, that you can love someone deeply and still choose distance. That boundaries are not walls. They're doors, and you get to decide who holds the key. The next morning, I placed the ballroom dance flyer on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Just because one chapter ends in silence doesn't mean the next can't start with music. By Thursday morning, the unraveling had a rhythm. Vendors calling, legal notices stacking, reputation cracks widening like hairline fractures across a porcelain mask. I didn't lift a finger. The consequences were moving all on their own now. That morning, Tracy, my financial advisor, called with a quiet update. The florist followed up again, she said, tapping her keyboard on the other end of the line. They've started daily holding charges on the orchids at JFK. They're now requesting immediate clearance or full forfeiture by tomorrow morning. I pictured the orchids, dozens of them. Silky white, extravagant, bought not for beauty, but for optics. I imagined them languishing in a warehouse cooler, slowly shriveling without anyone to care for them. A metaphor too perfect to ignore. The venue has issued formal breach notices, she continued, and they've been sent directly to Samantha's father's office. Logan's job, I asked softly. Tracy hesitated. The offer's been suspended pending review. The firm doesn't want the PR headache, especially with the litigation creeping into public view. Of course. These families had built their lives on curated appearances. What happens behind closed doors doesn't matter as long as the doors stay shut. Now they were swinging open, and for once I wasn't the one left standing in the cold. I thanked her, hung up, and returned to my breakfast, a bowl of oatmeal and half a grapefruit. Simple, predictable, unlike the chaos they were now choking on. Later that afternoon, Logan called again. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. His voice was stripped bare. Mom, everything's falling apart. I didn't respond. Let him fill the space. Samantha's parents are furious. Her father says I've embarrassed the whole family. My job offer's been rescinded. People at work are hearing rumors. Her mom's threatening legal action if the vendors sue them personally. Still, I said nothing. Mom, please, just release the payments. You can still fix this. Fix. As if that's all I'd ever done. Fix, I echoed. Logan, I wasn't even allowed to be a guest. That was Samantha, he started, but I cut in calm as ever. No, Logan, you stood there. You saw me being turned away. You didn't forget me. You erased me. He didn't deny it. You chose silence, I said. You let Samantha decide that your mother wasn't family, and now you want my rescue. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I didn't think it would spiral like this, but you were willing to risk it. I just wanted things to feel clean, he said. Not messy. I stared at the candle flickering on the table. You cared more about appearances than about respect, I said, and that's why it's messy now. There was nothing left to say. I ended the call without another word. That evening I went for a walk. The air was cool, crisp with early autumn, leaves crunched beneath my feet. Salem in this season always looked like something out of a Hallmark movie, golden light, tidy porches, scarecrows on stoops. I passed a couple walking hand in hand, laughing about something only they understood. Not jealousy, just a reminder not all families devour themselves. A small wisdom crept in as I walked. You don't need everyone to love you. You just need to stop loving people who only love your usefulness. Back home, I put on a pot of chamomile tea and sat in my favorite chair, the one with the sun-faded arms and a groove from decades of quiet strength. I picked up a book I hadn't touched in months. A novel about a woman who moves to the mountains after her family fractures. She finds silence, then peace, then a new version of herself. A bit on the nose, I suppose, but it felt right. Halfway through the second chapter, my phone buzzed. A text from Samantha. Just her name on the screen was enough to make my spine stiffen. I opened it. Patricia, I think we need to clear the air, for everyone's sake. I stared at it for a while, then turned off my phone. Because here's a quirky little truth: when people say clear the air, what they often mean is convince you to forget the smoke. I wasn't interested. I had learned how to breathe clean again. The next morning brought a knock at my door. Not dramatic, just 3 measured taps. I opened it to find Logan standing there, suit-wrinkled eyes hollow, a bouquet of grocery store lilies in his hand. He didn't smile, just held them out like a tired peace offering. Hi, Mom. I stepped aside. He came in slowly, like he wasn't sure he was allowed. The house smelled like lemon and tea and lavender oil. Safe, sacred, mine. I wanted to talk, he said, setting the flowers gently on the table. We're talking, I replied, pouring a cup of tea without asking if he wanted one. He rubbed his hands together. It's all falling apart. Yes, we didn't think it would get this bad. I know. There was a long pause. Then, Mom, can't you just sign the final releases just to help us close this out? I met his eyes. That's not what you're really asking, I said. What you're asking is, can I still count on you to fix things after I discarded you? His mouth opened, closed. I never wanted to discard you, he said, voice tight. No, I replied. You just wanted me invisible, present but silent, paid but not welcomed. He blinked hard the way someone does when they realize they're too deep for denial to help. I made a mistake. I sipped my tea. You made a choice, I corrected. He slumped in the chair across from me. I lost everything. No, I said gently. You just finally had to stand on your own. For a long time, we just sat there. No tears, no begging. Just 2 people who used to be mother and son in the way that mattered. Eventually, he stood. I don't know what to say. I nodded. That's okay. Sometimes silence says everything. He walked to the door, paused, and turned. Will you ever forgive me? I thought about that. I don't know, I said honestly, but I know I've already started forgiving myself. And that's where it has to begin. The door closed softly behind him. And for the first time in years, I let myself exhale without worry. The next week moved like honey, slow and golden, with just a hint of bitterness. I didn't hear from Logan again, and I didn't expect to. Samantha stayed silent too, which felt more like strategy than surrender. But I wasn't scanning my phone anymore. No more compulsive checking, no more waiting. I spent my mornings walking the trail near Lake Quinsigamond, where the fog clung low over the water and ducks quarreled in the reeds like old married couples. There's a certain wisdom to their rhythm, loud when it matters, quiet when it doesn't. In the afternoons, I organized the closet I'd neglected for years. I found Jack's old fishing vest, a pair of baby shoes Logan had worn, a stack of unsent holiday cards with carefully chosen stamps, already pressed in place. So many things I once meant to give. Now I gave them to memory. But the biggest shift didn't come in silence. It came in the mailbox. A thick cream envelope with gold embossing. No return address, but I knew the seal. Samantha's parents. Curiosity won. I opened it carefully. Inside was a formal letter, clearly not written by them. The tone was polite, but the legal phrasing gave it away. They were regretfully requesting reconsideration of withheld financial contributions to the wedding, citing breach claims, unforeseen contractual complications, and potential reputational harm. It ended with the suggestion that a quiet settlement would serve everyone's interest. I read it twice. Then I fed it directly into the shredder. Because here's something I've learned. Silence is not the same as permission, and politeness is not a cure for cruelty. The next day I met with Diane at her office. We sipped coffee over polished mahogany while she flipped through paperwork with surgical calm. "They're bluffing," she said, gesturing to a scanned copy of the letter. "I know," I replied. "They're hoping I'll cave to embarrassment." "But you haven't done anything wrong," Diane said, almost smiling. "I know," I repeated. "But I used to think being quiet meant being good. Now I know it just means being unprotected." She nodded, tapping her pen gently on the table. "Would you like us to issue a response?" she asked. "No," I said. "I think the silence says everything." And that was true. They'd wanted a performance, a lavish display of control masked as celebration. They never counted on the woman they dismissed having the power to dismantle it with a single refusal. After the meeting, I treated myself to lunch at the old cafe by the marina. I sat by the window with a grilled cheese and tomato soup and listened to the couple next to me arguing about whether Maine or Vermont had better fall foliage. I smiled to myself. That's the kind of debate I could handle these days. Later that evening, Gloria called. "How's the legend of Patricia Monroe progressing?" she teased. "Oh, steady as ever," I said, flipping through a recipe book on my kitchen counter. "Though I got a letter today. Very official. Very golden." "Ah," she said knowingly, "the legal gold leaf variety." "Exactly. And how did you respond?" "With a satisfying shred." She cackled. "That's my girl." We chatted for an hour just about life. She told me about her niece's new dog. I told her I was thinking about taking those ballroom lessons. "Do it," she said. "Nothing reminds you you're alive like moving to music." After we hung up, I stood by the window and watched the wind shake the maple trees. My reflection in the glass looked different, steadier maybe. Less like someone waiting to be seen and more like someone who finally saw herself. And I whispered not for anyone else to hear, just for me, I'm still here. And I'm not sorry. That night, I pulled out the old scrapbook I hadn't opened in over a decade. Inside were photos of Logan as a baby Jack, fishing in the Berkshires, even one of me at 27 hair too big, smile too shy. I paused on a photo of Logan in kindergarten holding a craft he'd made me for Mother's Day, a popsicle stick frame with glitter, and a picture of us glued in the middle. "Best mom ever," it read in crooked marker. I ran my fingers along the edge. That little boy had loved me once, and I had loved him enough to forget myself. But I wouldn't forget again. Because here's another bit of wisdom that age gives you. Forgiveness doesn't mean reopening the door. Sometimes it means closing it, gently, locking it, and placing a soft wreath outside as a reminder that you still believe in love, just not the kind that costs you your soul. It was strange how quickly peace became my new routine. Not loud, not triumphant, just quiet space that used to be filled with obligation. Mornings no longer began with anxious glances at my phone. Evenings no longer ended with second-guessing what I could have done better or earlier or less of. I started sleeping with the windows cracked open again, letting the night air settle over the room like a soft hush. The only sound was the rustle of the curtains and the occasional owl from the trees behind the house. Salem had turned colder in recent weeks, the leaves now fully surrendered to autumn flaming red and orange, like they were daring the cold to touch them. One morning, as I passed the local bulletin board outside the bakery, I noticed a flyer senior storytelling circle. Thursday, 6 p.m. All welcome. I paused, tapped my finger over the thumbtack, smiled. Maybe it was time to start sharing my story, not as a warning, not even for sympathy, but as a reminder that healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a warm chair in a small room filled with others who've made it through the fire. At the storytelling circle, I sat beside Nadine and Betty. We sipped cider from waxy cups and passed around a box of molasses cookies someone's granddaughter had made. The room smelled like cinnamon and old books. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I used to think being generous would protect me from being hurt. I said, my voice low but steady. But sometimes kindness just teaches people how far they can push you. Nods around the room. Soft knowing. A woman named Carol reached over and touched my hand. "You've still got your light," she said. They didn't take it. I blinked fast. Didn't expect that to land so squarely in my chest. Back at home that evening, I lit a single candle on my kitchen counter and made pasta, just for me, no compromising, no. What would he prefer, just garlic and cream and rosemary? Simple pleasure. And then the next knock came. Not Logan, not Samantha. A courier. A slim envelope. Official seal. Joanna Field's return address, the lawyer. Inside a single sheet of paper. I sat down and read it. Notice of petition filed request for limited financial guardianship. Petitioner Logan Reed. For a moment, I went still. The world didn't tilt. It didn't explode. It just paused. He was filing for control. Still. After everything. After I had handed over years after I'd walked away without revenge. After I gave him the grace of silence. He wanted access. Power. Maybe he was desperate. Maybe Samantha pushed. Maybe his pride just wouldn't tolerate losing control of the one person who used to give him everything. The petition claimed I was overwhelmed by finances, that I was showing signs of confusion for getting payments, isolating myself. It painted me as frail, vulnerable. It was fiction, but dangerous fiction, because public record has teeth. I closed my eyes, took one long breath. Then I picked up the phone and called Joanna. I just received it, I said. I saw the filing, she replied. We'll respond immediately. You have nothing to worry about. My voice stayed even, but it still hurts. I know, she said gently, but we're ready. And frankly, this helps us. It shows pattern, desperation, attempted coercion. We'll file a full counterclaim for harassment. I exhaled. This isn't just about money anymore, I said. It's about dignity. Joanna was quiet for a second. And that's why we'll win. After the call, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood in the window watching dusk fall like a thick curtain over the neighborhood. Porch lights blinked on one by one, like people refusing to give in to the dark. And I whispered, you tried to erase me. But I was still here. I was right here. The next day, I attended a town library board meeting, not for any dramatic reason, just because they'd needed a volunteer to help sort grant requests. It felt grounding, real. Everyone there was concerned with printer ink and how to afford new book bins. No lawsuits, no orchids, just people doing their best. A young woman named Tessa was leading the grant subcommittee. She glanced over and asked Eleanor, what did you used to do before retirement? I smiled. Oh, I made a career out of helping people, I said. Then I made a mistake thinking the people I helped would always help me back. She tilted her head. Did they? Not the way I expected, I replied, but it turns out the people who show up later, they're sometimes the ones who matter most. And there it was, my quirky fact of the week, libraries are like life. You don't need to remember everything you borrowed. Just return what you took and try not to leave the pages dog-eared. That night, I went to bed early. No dread, no spreadsheet open on my laptop, just the comfort of a pillow that knew my shape and a room that held no secrets. And as I drifted off, I smiled softly at a thought I hadn't dared believe until now. You can be whole again, even after betrayal, especially after betrayal. 2 days after the petition arrived, I got a call from Vanessa Bloom, my financial advisor. Her tone was crisp but calm, the way a pilot sounds when there's turbulence but no danger. Eleanor, she said, just a heads up, Logan's legal team tried to access documentation on your accounts, claimed they were conducting an audit on your behalf. I let out a short breath through my nose, and they got nowhere, she said with what I swear was a hint of pride. Our locks held, but you should be aware they're trying to establish a paper trail of concern. We'll document everything. Thank you, I replied. She paused, then added, I've seen this play out before, Eleanor. Families like this. They push, they prod, they try to find the hairline crack, but yours isn't cracking. It's granite. I smiled at that. Granite. That night, I pulled out my mother's old keepsake box, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were clippings, recipes in faded handwriting, and a tiny porcelain sparrow I'd broken when I was 6. She had glued it back together, seam still visible. You don't hide the break, she told me at the time. You honor it. That's where the story lives. I held that bird in my palm, now fingers curled gently around it. That's what I had become. Not unbroken, but unhidden. The next few weeks moved fast. Joanna filed our full response, attaching detailed documentation texts, voicemails, call logs, receipts, evidence of my clarity, of my planning, of Logan's calculated steps. We requested a hearing, not to fight back, but to expose. I expected another call from Logan, a warning, a threat, maybe an apology laced with manipulation. But none came. Instead, it was Nadine who showed up one Sunday morning standing at my door with cinnamon rolls, and that look she always had when something juicy had landed. Irene saw Samantha at the wine shop yesterday, she said, breezing in, alone, face like thunder. Said she looked ready to pop a cork off someone's head. I chuckled, pouring us both some tea. Trouble in influencer paradise. She said she was reevaluating the marriage, loudly, in the Sauvignon Blanc aisle. That tracks, I said. They built their whole life on stage lights. They never expected the audience to walk out. Nadine bit into a cinnamon roll. You okay? I nodded. Better than I've been in years. There was a pause. She studied me. You know, she said, I think you scared them. Not just because you pulled the money, but because you didn't fall apart. People like that expect scenes. They know how to manage drama, but silence boundaries. That's a language they never learned. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. They didn't know what to do with a woman who quietly, gently refused to break. Later that day, I received an email from Joanna, hearing date confirmed. 2 weeks, Salem County Courthouse. We'll be fully prepared. I closed the laptop. No fear in my stomach this time. Just that same calm, like when you finish packing a suitcase the night before a trip. You know you're ready. You just have to show up. That night, I took a bath. Lavender salts, old jazz humming from the Bluetooth speaker, and I caught myself humming along something I hadn't done in years. That's how I knew I was healing. Because joy doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it just hums. 2 days later, I received another unexpected visitor. This time, it was Betty. She brought over her old sewing basket, claimed the hinges were stiff and needed WD-40, but I could tell she just wanted company. We sat by the window, sipping coffee, the basket untouched. I read something the other day, she said, that forgiveness is like a muscle. You can stretch it, train it, but if you overuse it, it tears. I looked at her. That's exactly how it feels. You've been generous too long, Eleanor. People mistake that for softness. But I've seen stone under your skin. I smiled. You too. Oh, honey, she said, waving her hand. You think I made it to 78 by being agreeable. We laughed, and for a moment, it felt like being 30 again, surrounded by women who knew the world wouldn't always love you back, but you lived boldly anyway. That night, I did something I hadn't done since the wedding. I opened my journal, and I wrote, they underestimated the woman they erased. They thought absence would make me weaker, but absence became my shield. And in that silence, I found my power. Then I closed the journal and whispered the answer to a question that had haunted me for too long. What is love without respect? It's nothing, and I no longer settle for nothing. The courthouse in Salem isn't grand. No sweeping marble staircase or echoing halls. Just a squat brick building with creaky wooden benches and a coffee machine that dispenses something resembling caffeine if you squint hard enough. Still, as I stood outside its weathered entrance that cool Tuesday morning, I felt something profound, a full circle hush. Like every choice I'd made had led right here. Joanna met me on the steps, her briefcase swinging lightly, her tone crisp as ever. You ready? She asked. As I'll ever be, I said, tucking my scarf against the wind. The courtroom was small, intimate really, more conference room than drama stage. Logan sat at the far end of the row, shoulders stiff, jaw set. Samantha wasn't beside him. That alone said a lot. His attorney, a pale young man who looked like he still got ID'd at bars, nodded stiffly as we entered. The judge was a woman, mid-60s, sharp eyes, no nonsense. Her nameplate read Judge Carolyn Weiss. I liked her immediately. We took our seats. The clerk called the session to order. Petition for limited financial guardianship over Eleanor Reed, filed by Logan Reed. She glanced over her glasses at Logan's side. Counselor, please proceed. Logan's attorney cleared his throat and launched into what I can only describe as a well-rehearsed performance in imagined concern. My client has observed troubling behavior from his mother, he said, including financial confusion, refusal to communicate, and withdrawal from family. He rattled off vague claims, confusion with payments, isolation, emotional distress. Joanna didn't flinch. When it was our turn, she stood smoothly, clicked her pen once, and began. Your Honor, we will demonstrate not only that Mrs. Reed is of sound mind, but that this petition is not rooted in concern. It is retaliation. She submitted the packet, over 50 pages, messages, contracts, emails, a timeline so tight it could slice. Then came the kicker. Your Honor, please refer to tab 9, a financial audit prepared by Mrs. Reed's advisory team showing consistent, coherent management. Note the exact dates she revoked authorizations after her son publicly humiliated her at his wedding. The judge raised an eyebrow, publicly. Joanna nodded. We have a list of attendees who witnessed the exclusion. Their statements are in tab 12. She paused, and Your Honor. Let's not overlook motivation. Mr. Reed only pursued this guardianship after his access to Mrs. Reed's accounts was restricted. A small silence. Then Judge Weiss turned to Logan. Mr. Reed, do you have anything you'd like to add directly? Logan shifted. My mother is acting irrationally, cutting people off, creating legal structures to isolate herself. And does that concern you because you believe she's in danger or because she no longer includes you? Financially, the judge asked. His mouth opened, then shut. She nodded. That's what I thought. It was over faster than I'd expected. The judge dismissed the petition, firmly, with prejudice. She didn't lecture, didn't scold. Just looked Logan in the eye and said, it's a hard thing when the people who raised us learn to stand without us. But that doesn't make them incompetent. It makes them free. That line, it makes them free, settled into my bones. Outside the courthouse, the sky was the brightest shade of cold blue. Joanna touched my shoulder. He won't try again. He can't. I nodded. Thank you. You did this, she said. I just helped carry the torch. That evening, Nadine came over with a bottle of champagne that had probably been hiding in her fridge for a decade. We're celebrating, she declared, popping the cork with a dramatic twist. To freedom, to financial revenge, and to competent old broads with better spreadsheets than their lawyers, we toasted. And then, halfway through our glasses, she added, you know what they'll say about you at the center now, right? I raised an eyebrow. You're the woman who won in court without even raising her voice. I laughed, but somewhere deep inside, I knew she was right. And I knew what I'd say if anyone ever asked how I pulled it off. You don't have to scream, I'd say. You just have to stop saying yes. Later, I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a knit blanket, watching the wind move the trees. There's a moment in fall, right before the last leaf drops, when everything feels perfectly suspended. Not grieving, not growing, just being. That's where I was now, and it was enough. A week after the court hearing, I found myself standing at the window in my kitchen, looking out at the quiet street in Salem. It was a typical gray Oregon morning, misty with that soft scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. I wrapped my hands around a warm mug of black tea steam curling up and fogging my glasses. A peaceful kind of ache had settled in my chest, not grief, not joy. Something in between. Something like closure. The phone hadn't rung once in days. Not from Logan, not from Samantha, and certainly not from her parents, who had gone eerily silent since the breach of contract letters had reached their legal counsel. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. That morning, I received an envelope in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Logan's handwriting. I'm sorry, I thought I was protecting what we built. But I see now I was protecting what I took. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I finally see it. No signature, just that. I stood at the kitchen counter and reread it twice, then once more. And then I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer with my grandmother's recipes, the place where I kept things that once held heat, but no longer needed to simmer. Nadine stopped by in the afternoon, her umbrella-dripping cheeks flushed from the wind. Well, she said, tossing her scarf on the chair, the social committee's gone quiet. I think they're afraid you'll legally outwit them if they try to put raisins in the potato salad again. I smiled, let them try. She poured herself a cup of tea, then leaned in like she was about to deliver some hot gossip. I ran into Irene at the co-op. She said Samantha's parents pulled their investment out of Logan's firm. Quietly. No statements. But everyone knows. That was fast. "Well, Eleanor," she said, sipping, "you embarrassed the whole house of cards," without even speaking above a whisper. I stared at the steam rising from my mug. I didn't feel triumphant, just steady. And it was strange how light I felt even without apology, even without reunion. Maybe because sometimes winning doesn't mean mending the relationship. It means reclaiming yourself from it. Later that day, I went to the community center again. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a story people were whispering about. I just felt like me. Marge was already seated, a crossword puzzle in hand, her pencil tapping thoughtfully. "Well, if it isn't Lady Iron Spine herself," she said with a wink. I sat beside her. "It's good to be back." "Did they finally give up?" I nodded. She nodded back. Smart people usually do, or they lose more than they bargained for. Across the room, Betty caught my eye and gave me a small thumbs up. It was the kind of silent camaraderie you only earn through battle. Not a loud one, but the kind that leaves you reshaped inside. We played bingo that afternoon. I didn't win, but I didn't care. When I got home, I opened the binder one last time. The one with contracts, emails, authorizations, the whole battlefield laid out in perfect plastic sleeves. I removed the last few documents and stored them in my fireproof box. Then I carefully slid the rest into my paper shredder. Not out of anger, but because the war was over. That night, I sat on the porch again, stars peeking through the mist. The lavender I'd planted in spring was fading now, its scent more memory than bloom. I thought about love, about trust, about what it costs to give everything and what it takes to draw the line. And I thought of something my mother once said to me when I was just a teenager, full of questions and fury. "You can love someone, Ellie," she said, "and still need to walk away from them. Love doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means letting them learn the weight of what they lost." Back then, I hadn't understood it. Now I did. The truth wasn't just about Logan and Samantha. It was about every time I let myself be treated as optional. Every time I mistook silence for peace. Every time I accepted less, hoping it would one day grow into more. I reached for my journal and wrote, "Freedom isn't loud. It whispers. It waits. And when you finally choose it, it welcomes you home." I closed the book and smiled. Tomorrow I'd bake something. Maybe an apple pie. Maybe those lemon bars Logan used to love before everything became transactional. Not for anyone else, just for me. Because I'd finally remembered what it was to nourish myself first. And I wasn't going to forget again. The last Friday in October arrived with the crisp scent of wood smoke and cinnamon in the air. Salem's trees had given up their greens, exchanging them for deep russet and honey gold. Leaves danced in spirals across the sidewalks, a kind of quiet farewell. I spent the morning cleaning my little home, not because it was messy, but because it felt like something I wanted to mark. A reset, a fresh page. I dusted the windowsills, replaced the lavender sachets in my linen drawers, and opened the front door wide for a few minutes, letting the cold breeze sweep through. It smelled like beginnings. The doorbell rang just before noon. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I blinked. It was Samantha. She stood there in a sleek trench coat, hair pulled tight, no umbrella despite the drizzle. She looked elegant and exhausted. "I don't mean to intrude," she said, voice brittle, "but I need to say something." I hesitated for a beat, then stepped aside. She entered carefully, like the air might crack around her. The apartment smelled of chamomile and baked apples. I had a pie cooling on the counter. She didn't look at it. "I came because I realized I never saw you," she said, turning to face me fully. "I saw what Logan told me. I saw what you gave, but I didn't see you." I said nothing. She continued, voice soft but steady. "I thought the money was the love. I thought your presence was a condition, not a relationship. I didn't grow up with mothers who stuck around. That caught me off guard. I'm not excusing what I did," she added quickly. "I just wanted you to know I see it now. How much you gave. How much you protected us even when we didn't deserve it." I met her eyes then. "Why now?" I asked. She swallowed. "Because everything's falling apart, and I don't want to rebuild the same broken thing." For the first time, she looked around the room, her eyes landing on a framed photo of Logan as a boy, freckles, gap-toothed, holding a model rocket we'd built together. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted to apologize. No agenda." There was a long pause. Then I said, "I believe you." She blinked. "I believe you mean it today," I clarified, "and maybe tomorrow. But belief isn't the same as trust. That takes time." She nodded. Fair. I walked her to the door. Before she stepped outside, she turned back one last time. "You were the foundation," she whispered. "We just never noticed until the house cracked." Then she was gone. I stood there in the doorway for a moment, letting the breeze tug at my cardigan, the scent of the apple pie trailing out behind me like a tether. By the afternoon, Logan had still not called, and maybe he never would. I had stopped waiting. Instead, I went to the kitchen, sliced a piece of pie, and brought it to my neighbor, Mrs. Avery, who'd lost her cat the week before and had been too quiet since. She smiled when she saw me. "Is this cinnamon?" "Of course," I said, "and a little lemon zest." "That's how you know it's made with love," she whispered, taking the plate. And that's when I realized something important. Love doesn't vanish just because it was misused. It remains. You just learn to give it wisely. That evening, Nadine and I sat on the porch again, bundled in knit blankets, mugs of cider in our hands. "You know," she said, nudging me, "this all started with a wedding invitation you never received." I laughed. "Technically, I was just never uninvited." She smirked. "Well, I'd say you RSVP'd in your own way." We clinked mugs and sat there in the quiet, the sun setting slow behind the rooftops, the sky the color of old rose and ash. No revenge, no bitterness, just resolution, just peace, just the gentle sound of the world continuing without apology. Now that we've come to the end of this journey, I want you to breathe with me for a moment. Just slow, easy breath, in through the nose and out through the mouth. Let the stillness settle. You've walked with me through betrayal, through silence, through strength, found in the unlikeliest places. And maybe somewhere in these quiet words you recognized a piece of your own story. Maybe you've been the giver, the one who always said yes, the one who kept hoping your love would be enough to change someone who didn't see you fully. Or maybe you've had to learn the hardest lesson of all, that love without respect is not love at all. There is power in quiet decisions, in unsigned checks, in calm refusals, in walking away not with anger but with dignity intact. We don't always get apologies. We don't always get closure from others, but we can give it to ourselves. We can draw a circle around our hearts and say, "No more taking, no more diminishing. From here on, I am mine again." Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, I hope you feel that strength within you. Not loud, not dramatic, but solid, like an old oak that survived every storm and still stands quietly in the morning light. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to rewrite the ending, and you are absolutely allowed to rest.